People who were on shows like Super Nanny, World's Strictest Parents, or Scared Straight. What was the experience like, and what was the aftermath? My younger siblings, mother, and then stepfather were on a program in the UK called Mums on Strike in the mid-2000s. The premise was that the mother would be sick of doing everything around the house and would be whisked away to a luxury spa for a weekend, leaving the clueless father in charge of trying to take care of household duties. A lot of the conversations and scenarios were faked. I supposedly visited them for the weekend, but I did multiple different shoots across a few hours on the last day of filming, then went back home. They'd cause fights between the siblings by purposely creating situations where one was favored over the other. Also, the others would throw a tantrum. There was a shoot on location in our local town center, and they encouraged my little brother to run off into all sorts of different shops, causing hilarity as my stepfather tried chasing after him with two other children in tow. Meal times were a bit of a farce as well. As it was a weekend, my stepfather had to cook a traditional roast dinner. The production company intentionally supplied incorrect ingredients to make sure my stepfather looked like an idiot. They filmed my reaction to him trying to add beans to the roast a few different times, so they could pick the best one. In the end, after they'd got all the footage they wanted, they sent one of the production team out to the chippy to get us some actual edible food. You know, that production team sounds kinda solid actually. They make their content, they do the goofy thing of dad can't cook, and then get you some actual food? Not bad. I respect that in a lot of ways. Story 2. I went to an all-boys correctional school 40 miles into the high desert in Washington state. A couple other guys there went on shows like this and they never worked, hence being at correctional school. The school did pretty well straightening most of us out. However, unfortunately, there's always a couple of guys who just won't follow rules. If our school couldn't help you, you'd be sent to the other place. Basically a terrible juvenile prison in Mexico that was ran by US Marshals. One day, one of these marshals came to give us a talk. He spoke about the other place and basically scared the crap out of us. At the end of his speech, he said, "And unfortunately, one of you is coming with us today." And we all simultaneously crapped our pants. He says the name of the kid he's taking. We'll call him Colin. He then tells Colin to empty his pockets, take off his shoes and belt, and places him in handcuffs. The director of the school said encouraging words to him and asked if any of the other students wanted to say goodbye or wish him well. Dead silence. Then his roommate stands up and says, "I packed your stuff. You had no bags, so I put all your crap in some trash bags. Oh, and I'll miss you, I guess." A piece of Colin died that day. I never heard from him or about him after that day. Based off the rumors about that place in Mexico, it's possible he could still be there, and it's been 7 years since that day. Story 3. I was sent to a Scared Straight program as a teenager for a fear reaction. Basically, my first stepdad used to hit us a lot, and my mother looked the other way. Then, years later, my mom went to slap me during an argument, and I kicked her way out of panic. My then stepfather called the police who arrested me. My parents insisted they thought the cops would just scare me into apologizing. I don't really believe that, but I let it go. Anyway, as part of the pre-trial intervention, I had to do a boot camp-style Scared Straight program, complete with tons of physical punishment, ALA exercise, and a visit to a prison. We all got a canteen that was supposed to remind us of what we learned. It all felt cheesy and not scary because none of those people could inflict pain on me like that first stepdad. Anyway, I didn't learn anything except that adults didn't always know how to help kids with traumatic backgrounds. I knew I hadn't been wrong past what required a simple apology, and that it had been a flat panic reaction to being hit. I was just bigger and she wasn't expecting me to fight back. I knew my parents had overreacted calling the police when I had siblings steal cars and not get punished. So none of the scary stuff they yelled at us while we did push-ups or whatever was actually scary. Of course, I wasn't going to ruin my own future with a pattern of bad behavior. I mean, I had great grades, was in JROTC and Scouts, and was widely regarded as the good kid. So I said, "Yes, sir. No, sir." I ran when they said run. I was polite and wrote a polite, meaningless apology letter to my mother for the staff to hand over. When we went to the prison, I was quiet and just waited while the other kids looked terrified or sullen. But nothing was scary because all those people meant well and wanted us to all be proper, good citizens. Also, I had to go to domestic violence classes where they taught us how to not beat up our girlfriends. 6 weeks of group meetings about romantic partner abuse because that was how they interpreted domestic violence. First day, I explained why I was there and the teacher said, "Well, try to get something out of this anyway." I would get criticized for not admitting I had done controlling things in relationships, and I was such a goody two-shoes I hadn't even kissed with tongue yet. We, as a society, don't know how to handle kids with trauma. Scared straight is nothing if you know you don't deserve to be there. Like Sirius Black in Azkaban. Edit. I meant AKA exercise. They didn't beat us with sticks, but they did make us run around an obstacle course until people were puking. Thanks to everyone who sent nice thoughts. I was pretty prepared to catch hell off this post, but you're all being really nice. Also, as it turns out, I went into the army a few years after, so there's that. Story 4. Didn't end up on it, but my family was approached to take part in a German version of the reality show The World's Strictest Parents. Die strengsten Eltern der Welt. The reason being, my father is somewhat well known in my country for being a bit of a wild man. Looks like a Viking, very into the outdoors, fishing, hunting, etc. They'd found a special of him on 60 Minutes and a few clips of him adventuring online, and thought that Germans would enjoy watching bad kids being set straight by the bear man. Anyway, the interaction was done through a middleman, so to speak, who outlined what would be required of us, and what small compensation we would receive for going along with it. At the outset, it seemed fine, even a little exciting. We had close ties with a lot of exchange students in the past. We lived in a very small community in the mountains, and we all loved traveling, and my father didn't seem to mind the sound of helping out some struggling kids and possibly showing them a different side of life. Not necessarily that hunting and the outdoors are the only way to go, but more open their minds a little, take them out of their comfort zones, etc. We watched a few clips of the shows online and decided we were laid back enough as a family that the drama wouldn't really wind us up or anything, while alarm bells started ringing after a bit more correspondence with the middleman. He started insinuating that there would be times where the kids would be told to play up situations, and that we would either have to roll along with the staged drama, or actively join in and amp it up for the cameras. My dad laid it out pretty straight. He'd be happy to take these kids under his wing and show them some pretty cool adventures: glacier crossing, hiking through rainforests, caving, whitewater kayaking, hunting, or at least watching him hunt, and tons of other activities, and I had just become a scuba instructor and even offered to take them out diving on geothermal vents. But they really stressed the whole, people watch the show to see bad kids act batcrap crazy, so that's what you're expected to encourage vibe. We politely turned them down at this stage. A few months later, the middleman actually emailed us again, telling us it was probably a good idea that we hadn't gone along with it. Apparently, they never paid him for any of his work organizing host families or setting up scenarios. Oh well, dodged a bullet there, I guess. All my friends in Germany seem to think so. Story 5. Ah, crap, this is me. Here in Australia, I think we ended up with a Super Nanny ripoff or spin-off or something eventually, but all 3 major networks had something in the works similar to it, because every parent wants that Thursday evening sigh of relief of, oh well, at least my Timmy isn't like that boy. My parents loved TV. Every dinner was in front of the telly, and they constantly would try to be in the studio audiences. They did end up in a couple of times. Lo and behold, there was a casting call for parents at their wits' end with unruly children. We ended up on a shortlist along the way somehow, with me as the subject. 2 middle-class parents in suburbia with 2 angelic girls and an unruly boy in the middle that they couldn't deal with. I was two-faced, cruel to my siblings, reckless and disobedient. But where's the narrative? What made our family interesting enough? Well, they asked for copies of my transcripts, and look, he's a student that performs well, is loved by teachers, but has a couple of infractions for mean words to his cohort. They came around with the idea that they could get a grasp of this really interesting narrative of the teacher's pet gremlin who is cruel to his peers, to his sister, to his family, and probably to his dog at that rate. I remember not knowing what was going on at first. It wasn't the first time my parents had just planted me in front of a child psychologist. They thought I was mentally handicapped for a bit. Nope, just missed the lesson on how to use a ruler, so my teacher recommended getting me tested when I couldn't. And there were a few interviews with my parents and I on camera for the casting process. I only found out about what exactly it was from my only friend telling me he was in the casting call as well. See, my only friend at the time was a kid who'd bully the crap out of me. Teacher's pet, likes maths. But then his partner in crime moved away and I was the only schmuck desperate enough for friendship. His mother suggested to mine to go on the program since she was also at her limit. That friend was genuinely a terror though. However, a product of drugs in the family, so I don't see that being camera friendly. That child psychologist they sent me to was an absolute godsend. He quickly came to a conclusion that something wasn't right. Basically because he asked, would you say you're a bit disruptive to your family? Or something along those lines, and I parroted back, absolutely yeah, I'm a proper terror. Turns out I was pretty much just the family scapegoat for that part of my life. Yeah, sure, I never studied like my angelic sisters, and something about how I coasted along on my smarts upset my family. I was punished in one way or the other pretty much every minute of the day. Usually no video games or no books or whatever I was using at the moment, and I was always punished for something arbitrary. I remember later in childhood having a calendar for a while tracking when each punishment ticked over to another so I could change my leisure entertainment. Basically, after a bit of observation where I was a pretty shy, polite kid, and that I was just convinced I was a pain for those around me, and I read a lot but didn't like vegetables or studying, they received the child psychologist report and jumped ship. The reason my mother later told me they gave her was because they couldn't get permission to film at a school and catch me being two-faced. The big thing was that the psychologist they sent me to offered at a very steep discount to keep seeing me, promising he could help me with their situation. He instead helped me learn to be more resilient, how to understand my own worth, and taught me some really good social skills. He really did help me a lot, and when my parents said they couldn't make the commute that far to see him, he helped pay for sessions with a more local therapist. He understood what was going on. He never used severe language that blamed my family either. He just helped. I now have a good job, still live with my parents and sisters because I'm still convinced I'm not going to be able to survive on my own, am scared of driving because I know I'll somehow cause an accident, so never got my license, and am a functional alcoholic. Not the happiest ending, but hey, we're getting there. Story 6. Wasn't on a show like that, but on one where my mum pranked me. The show was called something like Born Silly, and was supposed to air on Channel 4, in the UK, by the way. It never did. Or my episode didn't anyway. I knew I had been auditioning for a show, but didn't know what it would be until the prank actually happened. My mum told me all it was being an audience member on a random show. Anyway, we went down to this massive shopping center in Watford, where we apparently were going to be filming the audience thing. So we sat outside this juice bar for a bit, when the chaperones came over and my mum pretended they were old family friends. One of them took my mum to get her mic set up, and one stayed with me where I talked about very personal things thinking she knew my siblings and the like. My mum came back over, they left, and we walked towards where the prank was supposed to happen. So there was this weird blue bench thing that was really out of place that we had to sit on. My mum kept on encouraging me to sit on it, but I was more interested in sitting on top of a bench above some stairs to watch all the crowd go by. Eventually, I gave in and sat with my mum. This is where it would happen. So a woman came over in a Mary Poppins outfit with a small purse around her arm. She sat next to me and put the bag down. The bag had a small hole in the bottom, and the purpose of the weird bench was to store items for her to pull out. She pulled out a few instruments and even a plank of wood if I recall. She told me she was in a rush and wanted me to put it all back for her. She ran off and the hatch closed. I wasn't aware there was a hatch, obviously, and the prank was me trying to put all the items back in the purse. I knew what was going on at this point and played into it. I acted like I was shocked. Eventually, the woman came back over and revealed it was a prank. She showed me where the cameras were, and I had one more thing to do. We sat on the bench above the stairs I mentioned earlier, and they put a camera in front of my mum's face where she had to pretend she was holding a phone and asked me things like how it felt to be pranked. I kept looking at the crowds below. Should probably mention I have ADHD, and it was quite out of control at the time, and I would not pay attention to the camera. We finished filming that, and I got to talk to some of the crew for a bit while they packed up. They were all very friendly, but the person who did the Mary Poppins impression was awful acting-wise. After that, I got a badge, which I still have somewhere, with the logo of the show on it, and we went home. You know, I get why this doesn't always make the best TV, but there is something somewhat heartwarming about just a super innocent prank like this, where a kid probably just freaks out because something really weird is happening that they don't understand. Entertaining? Perhaps not, but at least a little sweet. Story 7. The show Rock School was at my school for the second series. The first series being shot at a posh school. They wanted to contrast by going to a rough school. Loads of people applied for it but didn't get accepted because they wanted people who couldn't play instruments. So one day Gene Simmons rocks up at school and everyone mobs him. Despite the fact that 99% of these 13 to 16-year-olds probably couldn't name a Kiss song or were even remotely interested beforehand. I'm not even sure the kids who were in the band got to spend a great deal of time with him, but they did have one session with Tommy Iommi and I got a glimpse of him, which was cool being a Sabbath fan myself. Anyway, they did their gig for the series finale and that was that. The singer of the band was given a really shady record deal and had a few songs in the charts, but after his career never really took off, he unfortunately took his own life. Really sad story. Story 8. I haven't seen anyone talk about World's Strictest Parents, which I was on in 2011. My family was selected to be the strict parents part of the show. They basically showed up at the church my dad preaches at and asked people who they would recommend to be on the show, and they recommended our family. We did not want to, but you get paid a little bit, so we went with it. We went through psychiatric evaluations to make sure we weren't psycho, then got okayed to be on the show. For me, it was a great experience. I was a senior in high school who wanted to go into broadcast production, so I hung around with the producers and watched the process. They sent the 2 bad kids to us, and they stayed with us for 4 days. During the 4 days, the producers had events planned that would annoy any lazy teenager. They were like, make them do yard work at 2 p.m. on a hot day, or make them build a shed with basic tools. My parents were really not strict, especially compared to the other parents on the show, so the producers had to cause a ruckus most of the time to get some conflict going. This included them planting an adult content DVD in the boy's suitcase, then making my dad go through his stuff and find it. In the end, we became really close with the two kids and had a good time with them. I still talk to the boy today and he's doing well. The show didn't really change them, but they definitely appreciated the experience and advice my parents gave them. Story 9. Not one of those specific shows, but this story fits the question. I was on an episode of True Life on MTV back in the early 2000s. I wasn't the focus, but part of a group of people involved. The episode was, I Want to Be a Fashion Model, or something to that effect. I was doing a runway show with a group of artists and designers. I happened to be one of the MCs for the event. I should mention we were a bunch of punk and goth kids. The show was an alternative fashion show and pageant, so lots of club and fetish wear and Victorian and cyberpunk styles. Anyway, MTV was following one of the contestants. She was an out-of-state girl from the regular pageant circuit, and this was her first alternative show. Obviously, MTV thought this dichotomy would make for good TV, and they were right, but not in the way they expected. The main thing that stuck out about the experience was how much the MTV crew was trying to force or encourage things to play out how they wanted them to. It was obvious they were trying to orchestrate some of the dramatic, hyper-realistic storyline. We would have conversations or interactions, then a producer would step in and ask us to have that conversation again or reenact an action like entering a room or something. They'd say, do that again, but this time do this or add that. The production staff would corner us individually and ask us clearly leading questions about other people. So-and-so said this about this event or person. What do you think? Doesn't that make you mad? Or, what are you irritated or upset about? Obviously trying to get negativity sound bites to use in post. Mind you, this was in the early days of reality shows, so their tactics weren't as refined. Or people were more reluctant. Either way, we were already busy, coordinating and running a fashion show. Everything was time sensitive, so after a while, we stopped humoring them. We basically said, no more of this. You get the footage you get. Also, the contestant they were following, we discovered from talking to, was signed up to this show by MTV producers specifically to manufacture drama. They knew the show theme, and this girl did not. She was completely blindsided and scared. They expected us to reject her or make fun of her because she's a beauty queen and we're scary goth kids. They were disappointed, I think. We pretty much accepted this girl right away and were very supportive of her and made her feel comfortable being totally out of her element. A few of our designers even gave her a full set of pageant clothes fitting the theme. I think they expected us to let her walk out there in her ball gown while the other contestants are in Victorian-style gothic dresses. Yeah, no. Again, we were mostly a bunch of goth and punk kids, so we could not give a crap about the episode or MTV. We all felt bad how they manipulated this girl. Really messed up if you think about it. Afterwards, we had a watch party when the episode aired a few months later. From what I remember, this was well over a decade ago now. Not surprisingly, MTV barely used us. We didn't give them what they wanted. I think our segments were maybe 2 minutes of the total hour-long episode. To be honest, I've left out quite a bit. The day was so long and such a surreal experience. It stuck with me, but I haven't thought about this in years. I've got to track down that episode sometime now that I'm older, and I can probably appreciate it on a different level. Also to see how cringy we all were back then, but I digress. This is just a super wholesome story. The producers were really mean with this, for sure. Clearly wanting to make this girl as uncomfortable as possible for TV. Like, come on, man, it's TV, you can fake that kind of stuff. You don't need to make her actually feel bad about being there and doing her thing, and not telling her what kind of show she's signed up for. Insane. Good on you and your friends, OP. MTV did not deserve that source of entertainment. Not one bit. Anyway, that's the last story we have for today. I'd like to thank you all so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I will see you in the next one.